one of the things that we didn't appreciate, Bush's foreign policy in office is nothing like what he promised before he came into office. The second thing to be said is that his frame of mind, when you interview him, you're struck by the fact that he has a very long time frame, where he thinks in 50 and 100-year increments and is relatively uninterested in execution in the next week or so. And so that's a frame of mind issue that turns out to be kind of a large problem. And when you look at the frames of mind at the other candidates, to me, they have very different sorts of minds. Mitt Romney has a very businesslike mind, makes a list here, makes a list there, very organizationally sophisticated, but you're not quite sure about the underlying assumptions and core convictions. I think Barack Obama, to me, has the most amenable frame of mind, from my own point of view, even though my politics are a little different from his, in that I think he is very sophisticated in understanding the different assumptions that people bring to their life. That people from one culture have a very different set of assumptions from people at another culture. And that probably comes from his personal background. It probably comes from the difference between Harvard Law School and the South Side of Chicago. But if you look at his domestic anti-poverty program, it's based on understanding the sophisticated assumptions kids bring to elementary school and stuff like that. Hillary Clinton, I think, is by far the smartest and most policy expert of the candidates. To me, one of the two big stories of this election campaign are the collapse of McCain and the continued rise of Clinton. And it's because her depth of knowledge is deeper than all the others. And then the final thing, and I don't have a view on this, Bush and his father, I think, saw foreign affairs as being run by the club of men in power. 12 people ran the world. They met in palaces, and then, they made decisions. To me, that vastly overestimates the power of leadership and vastly underestimates the power of all the other stuff going on in the world. And I'd like to see a candidate who shows some awareness of all that other stuff, less of the people in palaces.
Okay, great. Let's move along. Another question here.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ann Richard from the International Rescue Committee, and we work with refugees and displaced people. And it was funny to hear you, as the moderator, sort of give us this division between mushy involvement and mushy power, and then a more, occupying a country. When over your head it says the Center for U.S. Global Engagement, and the audience here today represents everything in that big area of ways to engage with other countries that are much more constructive and peaceful and productive, from trade through the private sector to things like my organization does, where we are working with refugees and displaced people and victims of conflict. So, for example, in Afghanistan, you can see how a PRT might do this military form of foreign aid of not just training police, but also building a school. But what my organization will do is we'll hire 95% Afghans who perhaps were refugees in Pakistan that we started working with years ago. And then we'll look at all the cultural issues that have to do with getting a girl to school, such as getting involvement from the parents, having a PTA, having a curriculum that the community will support, having a safe path to school, and then having a school building that doesn't burn down, and a female teacher. So I feel that the division you've sort of put up doesn't capture a lot of the middle ground that this audience represents. So do you have any reaction to that?
Okay. I didn't mean to imply that. I think we were trying to talk about the middle ground here for the most part. I think there are people outside this room who are afraid of another attack like 9/11, who are afraid in general and are worried that the U.S. cannot be seen as soft and do perceive things like public diplomacy as soft and an indulgence that we can't afford that maybe we could during another time that we can't now. And I just think that it's important that we address those concerns. And I think that if people in this room, if everyone is in favor of stronger U.S. global engagement, as I am myself, I think you have to come to the table with your arguments solid so that you can say, well, this isn't just soft and mushy. This isn't Mother Teresa foreign policy. This is smart. This is enlightened self-interest. This is enlightened altruism, that we're helping people in Afghanistan because, in fact, the terrorists for 9/11 were trained in Afghanistan, and here's a smart way to do it. So I didn't mean to imply that everything in this room we're talking about is mushy. So anyway,
they'd rip you limb from limb if they were hard power tests.
Well, maybe
Thank
the
God.
point is that this audience understands it, but how
Right.
do we get the rest of the nation to understand that? Is it
I
through
think
the
one way you have to do it is
candidates?
to say
it
that,
through
is to
the
convince people
talking heads?
it's not mushy, and that it will actually make you safer. Because people who are afraid don't necessarily want to hear about some new magazine launched in Beirut, or even, don't take this the wrong way, but even your work with refugees in Afghanistan. They would see that as secondary. I think what one has to do is link the, I'm putting this in quotes, soft, mushy agenda with America's self-interest, and to show that in fact they're tied, that this isn't one or the other. Over here.
Yeah, I'm David Bryden with Global AIDS Alliance. I wanted to come back to an issue that Walter Pincus raised about tied aid, aid that is channeled through U.S. agencies, in contrast to aid that is channeled through multilateral mechanisms or other means. And I wanted to come to David Brooks and ask specifically, I mean, we see in the area of health expenditure, for instance, PEPFAR channeling in terms of, in dollar terms, most of its money through large US-based NGOs, in some cases drawing people away from the public health system, which is already understaffed and under-resourced. Or in the case of aid to education, we see the United States government, including Democrats in Congress, actually favoring channeling US education dollars through wealthy US-based NGOs and putting less money into such things as the fast track initiatives, catalytic fund that actually go to help financing nationally nationally derived education plans. Do you see that as a problem? I mean, in terms of undermining local engagement, local buy-in, local capacity building, this phenomenon of tied aid?
Walter, you want to take that on? No?
Since you want
Okay,
to
go
go,
ahead.
I'll listen to David.
Okay.
I guess my first reaction was I took a tour of PEPFAR facilities in Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa about a year or two ago. And one of the things that struck me was how locally run they were. The doctors tended not to be local, but the local government officials who were there seemed to have sense of control. And the way this seemed to manifest itself, here we have this huge debate between abstinence and condoms. And there, at least my experience on these 10 days of travel was that they had no debate. They had abstinence and condoms. And a lot of our debates that we have surrounding PEPFAR were not debates they were having. That they were just giving out condoms, or if somebody was 13, they would talk about abstinence. If they were 16, they'd give them a condom. And that these were not, struck me as someone who travels and looks at a lot of programs, this struck me as a highly successful program. It did impose our values, and this goes back to something Ann said. It was about the importance of gender relations and our perception of what gender relations should be, and what local people's perceptions of gender relations should be. And one of the things that struck me is, on this trip, all you saw were women. And there was one hospital we were at where there were 848 women getting ARVs, or yeah, that's right, antiretroviral drugs. And they spent a year trying to get their male partners to come in, and they got 8 men to come in. And this was something where I thought we should impose our values a little, and empower the women to try to lean on the men to get tested and not be such beasts. But as for the staffing and the draining away resources, I'm not qualified to talk about